The seasons. 45-year-old Mason Brooks faces the bitter reality of losing his family's century-old ranch. With foreclosure looming and hope dwindling, he receives an unexpected proposition from Eleanor Whitman, the formidable 71-year-old cattle baroness of the neighboring Double W. Her offer is simple yet startling: marriage in exchange for saving his ranch. Mason expects a cold business arrangement, but as dawn breaks over shared morning rides and evenings filled with stories of the Old West, he discovers a woman whose spirit burns brighter than the prairie sun. Could this unlikely union become the greatest love story these plains have ever witnessed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mason Brooks ran his weathered fingers across the embossed letterhead of First Wyoming Bank. The crisp paper, a stark contrast to the worn leather of his father's old desk. February wind rattled the ranch office windows, carrying with it the hollow sound of winter's last stand. The foreclosure notice didn't tell him anything he didn't already know, but seeing it in black and white made his stomach clench all the same. 30 days. He spoke the words aloud to the empty room, his voice echoing off walls adorned with 5 generations of Brooks family history. The deed to the Triple B ranch hung in its original brass frame, his great-great-grandfather's signature, still bold against the yellowed paper. Joshua Brooks had homesteaded this land in 1889, back when Wyoming was still a territory. Now, more than a century later, it would be Mason who lost it all. He stood, boots heavy on the plank floor, and walked to the window. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-patched pasture where the last of his cattle herd, barely 50 head, huddled against the cold. 3 years of drought had forced him to sell off most of the stock, and last summer's grasshopper plague had decimated what remaining grazing land they had. The bank had been patient, more patient than he had any right to expect, but patience wouldn't make the rain fall or the grass grow. "Dad, I'm sorry," he whispered, eyes drifting to the photograph on his desk. Thomas Brooks smiled back at him. From beneath a sweat-stained Stetson, one arm around a teenage Mason's shoulders as they stood before their first successful spring roundup. His father had taught him everything he knew about ranching, about living with honor, about never giving up. But he hadn't taught him how to save a dying ranch in a changing world. The sound of tires crunching on gravel drew his attention. Through the frost-edged window, he watched as Joe, his only remaining ranch hand, pulled up in the battered Ford pickup. The young man leaped out, waving an envelope as he approached the office. "Mr. Brooks," Joe called out, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. "Special delivery just came to the post office. Martha asked me to bring it over right away." Mason met him at the door, taking the cream-colored envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, with Double W Ranch embossed in the corner. Eleanor Whitman's ranch. His pulse quickened slightly. The Double W was the largest spread in the county, running thousands of head of cattle across tens of thousands of acres. Some of that land bordered the Triple B, though he'd had little interaction with its owner over the years. "Thanks, Joe," he said, turning the envelope over in his hands. "How are the south pasture fences holding up?" "Good as they can be, considering. Found 2 posts that'll need replacing come spring, but they'll hold for now." Joe hesitated, scratching at his beard. "Mr. Brooks, about next month's pay?" Mason's chest tightened. "Joe, No, sir, that's not what I mean. I know things are tight. I was thinking maybe we could work something out. My uncle's got some hay he's willing to trade for labor. Might help stretch things a bit." The offer, well-intentioned as it was, only twisted the knife deeper. Joe had a young family of his own to support, yet here he was, trying to help keep the Triple B afloat. "I appreciate that, Joe, more than you know. But we both know this goes deeper than hay." Joe nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, offer stands anyway. I'll go check on that loose board in the barn while I'm here." Alone again, Mason sank back into his chair and opened Eleanor Whitman's letter. The handwriting was elegant but strong, much like the woman herself, from what he'd heard. "Dear Mr. Brooks, I would appreciate the opportunity to discuss a matter of mutual benefit regarding our adjoining properties. Please join me for lunch tomorrow at the W main house, 12:30 sharp. I believe you'll find the conversation worth your while. Regards, Eleanor Whitman." Mason read the note twice more, wondering what the cattle baroness could want. The double. Ubu was thriving. He'd seen their trucks hauling hay all winter, their cattle fat despite the drought. Maybe she was looking to buy him out, save herself the trouble of waiting for the bank to do it. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth, but he was in no position to refuse any possibility, no matter how unpalatable. His gaze drifted back to his father's photograph. "What would you do, Dad?" The smiling image offered no answers, but Mason could almost hear his father's voice. "Son, a Brooks faces his troubles standing up." He reached for the phone to confirm his attendance. Whatever Eleanor Whitman wanted, he'd face it with what dignity he had left. The W's main house rose from the Wyoming prairie like something out of another era. Mason guided his truck up the long drive, gravel crunching beneath his tires, taking in the imposing two-story structure with its wraparound porch and solid timber beams. Unlike the weather-beaten simplicity of his own ranch house, the W's headquarters spoke of old money and enduring success. He parked beside a pristine 1960s Chevrolet pickup, its blue paint still gleaming despite its age. As he stepped out, the scent of pine smoke drifted from one of the house's 3 chimneys. His boots sounded hollow on the porch steps, each creak seeming to announce his arrival like an uncertain apology. Before he could knock, the heavy oak door swung open. A Hispanic woman in her 50s smiled warmly. "Mr. Brooks, I'm Maria. Mrs. Whitman is expecting you in the study. This way, please." The interior of the house matched its impressive exterior. Hardwood floors gleamed beneath authentic Navajo rugs, and the walls displayed a museum-worthy collection of Western art. But what caught Mason's eye was a well-worn Stetson displayed on a simple wooden peg, a working man's hat among all this elegance. Maria noticed his gaze. "That was Mr. Whitman's," she said softly. 20 years gone this spring, but Mrs. Whitman keeps it right where he left it." They passed through a formal dining room that could have seated 20, then down a hallway, lined with photographs. Mason slowed, drawn to the images. They told the story of the W through the decades, cattle drives, roundups, brandings. In many of the later ones, he recognized Eleanor Whitman, first as a striking woman in her 50s, standing beside a silver-haired man he assumed was her late husband, then gradually aging into the formidable figure she'd become, always with that same straight-backed posture and keen-eyed gaze. "Mrs. Whitman prefers punctuality," Maria reminded him gently. The study occupied the entire east wing of the house. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls of leather-bound books and what appeared to be original Charles Russell paintings. Eleanor Whitman sat behind a massive desk of polished oak, her silver hair swept back in an elegant twist, her posture as straight as in those photographs. "Mr. Brooks," she said, rising with surprising grace. "Thank you for coming. Maria, we'll take our lunch in here." Mason removed his hat, suddenly conscious of the mud on his boots and the worn spots on his jeans. "Mrs. Whitman, Eleanor, please." She gestured to a leather armchair. "And I'll call you Mason, if that suits." He settled into the chair, watching. As she resumed her seat, despite her age, there was nothing frail about Eleanor Whitman. Her movements were deliberate, her blue eyes sharp and assessing as they met his. "I imagine you're wondering why I asked you here," she said, folding her hands on the desk. "I'll come straight to the point. I know about the foreclosure." Mason stiffened. "Ma'am, Eleanor," she corrected, "and please let me finish. This Triple B has been your family's life's work for 5 generations. It's also the only property along Clear Creek that the W doesn't own. I have a proposition for you." Maria returned with a tray of sandwiches and coffee, setting it on a side table before quietly withdrawing. Eleanor poured for them both, her hands steady. "The Double W needs new blood," she continued. "Someone who understands ranching, who respects the land and its traditions. Someone with integrity. I've watched how you've handled these difficult years, Mason. You've fought hard and honorably." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. "I'm offering you a chance to save your ranch and help secure the Double W's future. A merger of sorts." Mason's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "A merger?" "A marriage," Eleanor said simply. "One year to start. You'd maintain operational control of the Triple B with access to Double W resources. In return, you'd assist with Double W management, bringing your expertise to our operation. After the year, if we're both satisfied, we make it permanent. If not, you walk away with enough capital to clear your debts and start fresh." The coffee suddenly tasted like dust in Mason's mouth. "Mrs. Whitman, Eleanor, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it." Her eyes held his, unwavering. "This isn't charity, Mason. It's a business arrangement between equals, one that could benefit us both." Through the study windows, Mason could see the Double W's vast pastures, rolling toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, they merged with his own struggling acres. He thought of his father's photograph, of Joe's worried face, of the bank's foreclosure notice. "How long do I have to decide?" "The bank gives you 30 days. I'll give you 3. Think carefully, Mason. Sometimes pride is best served by swallowing it." 3 days of sleepless nights led Mason back to the Double W. The morning sun had barely crested the eastern hills when he pulled up to the main house, his decision weighing as heavy as the leather briefcase his lawyer had given him. Inside were documents Charlie Peterson had drawn up. Contingencies, protections, everything a man might need when considering marriage to one of the wealthiest ranchers in the state. This time, Eleanor met him at the door herself. She wore casual ranch wear, pressed jeans, a crisp chambray shirt, and well-worn boots that told him she was no stranger to actual ranch work. "You're early," she said, approval in her tone. "Come in. Maria's got coffee ready." They settled in the study again, but this time Eleanor chose to sit in the leather armchair across from him rather than behind her desk. The morning light softened her features, and Mason noticed laugh lines around her eyes he hadn't seen before. "I've had my lawyers draw up some papers," she said, reaching for a folder on the side table. "But first, I think we should talk plainly, just the two of us." Mason nodded, setting his own briefcase aside. "I agree." "Good." She leaned back, studying him. "You have concerns. Let's hear them." "My daughter," Mason started. "Sarah. She's away at college in Colorado studying veterinary medicine. This would affect her future, too. The agreement includes provisions for her education, naturally. And should anything happen to either of us, both the Triple B and her inheritance would be protected." Eleanor's expression softened. "I had a daughter too, Mason. Lost her in a riding accident 30 years ago. I understand about wanting to protect your child." The revelation surprised him. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. Not many do." She poured. "Then both coffee. What else?" "The Triple B. I need to know I'll have real authority to run it, not just as a figurehead." "Of course. You'll maintain full operational control of your ranch with access to Double W resources, equipment, personnel, grazing rights. In return, I expect your expertise and assistance with Double W operations. We'll make decisions about both properties together." She handed him a cup. "I'm not looking for a trophy husband, Mason. I need a partner." The directness of her statement made him chuckle despite himself. "I suppose at my age, I wouldn't make much of a trophy anyway." Her blue eyes sparkled with unexpected humor. "Oh, I wouldn't sell yourself short. Now, what else is bothering you? The age difference, perhaps?" Mason shifted uncomfortably. "It's unusual." "Life is unusual," Eleanor replied. "I'm offering you a business arrangement, Mason, not asking you to be my romantic hero. We'll share a home, run our ranches, and hopefully become friends. Anything beyond that," she shrugged, Well, life has a way of surprising us. They spent the next hour going through the documents. Eleanor's lawyers had been thorough but fair. The agreement protected both parties' interests while offering genuine opportunities for collaboration. What struck Mason most was the careful attention to his autonomy. Eleanor had ensured he wouldn't feel like an employee or a kept man. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said as they finished reviewing the papers. She opened a desk drawer and withdrew an envelope. "This is personal, not legal. I'd like you to read it after you leave. It explains me, I suppose, why I'm proposing this arrangement. You should know who you're really dealing with before you sign anything." Mason took the envelope, noting the weight of the paper, the faint scent of lavender. "I appreciate that. Take a few days," she said, rising. "Discuss it with Sarah. Make sure you're at peace with your decision." At the door she paused. "Oh, and Mason? The cattle in the south pasture need moving to higher ground. The creek tends to flood this time of year. I'd hate to see them get caught in it." He stared at her. "How did you—" "I've been watching that pasture for 40 years. The creek hasn't changed its mind yet." She smiled, and for a moment Mason caught a glimpse of the young woman she must have been. "Consider it your first piece of WW wisdom, free of charge." The Clearwater County Gazette's headline hit the breakfast tables on a crisp March morning. "WW and Triple B announce merger through marriage." Mason stared at his own face, looking back at him from the paper, a photo taken years ago at the county fair beside his prize bull. Beside it was a more recent picture of Eleanor, elegant in her ranch wear, standing before the WW gates. "Dad, please tell me this is some kind of joke." Mason looked up from the paper to find Sarah. In his kitchen doorway, her laptop clutched to her chest like a shield. She must have driven through the night to get here from veterinary school in Colorado. "Good morning to you too, honey," he said, pushing out a chair for her. "You should have called. I'd have picked you up from the airport." "Don't change the subject." She dropped into the chair, her dark hair, so like her mother's, falling forward as she leaned in. "You're marrying Eleanor Whitman, the cattle baroness? She's older than Grandma would have been." Mason poured her a cup of coffee, buying time to choose his words carefully. "It's complicated, Sarah." "Then uncomplicate it for me." Her voice cracked slightly. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're selling yourself to save the ranch." The accusation stung, but Mason couldn't deny the grain of truth in it. "I'm making a choice to protect our legacy. Mrs. Whitman, Eleanor, is offering a fair partnership." "Partnership?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" Before Mason could respond, a truck pulled up outside. Through the window, he saw Joe helping his wife Lisa down from the passenger seat, their 2-year-old son balanced on her hip. "Mr. Brooks?" Joe called from the porch. "Got a minute?" "Come on in," Mason replied, grateful for the interruption. But when the young family entered, he saw the newspaper tucked under Joe's arm, and his heart sank. Lisa spoke first, bouncing her son as she faced Mason. "We wanted you to know, whatever people are saying in town, you've got friends who understand." She glanced at Sarah. "Sometimes the bravest things look the craziest from the outside." Sarah stood abruptly. "I need some air." She stalked out, screen door slamming behind her. "She'll come around," Lisa said softly. "Change is hard on everyone." Joe cleared his throat. "Speaking of change, Mr. Brooks, does this mean I still have a job?" "Of course you do. In fact," Mason managed his first genuine smile of the morning, "we might be hiring more hands soon. The WW runs about 30,000 acres. And Mrs. Whitman," Joe shifted uncomfortably. "What's she really like? Up close, I mean." Mason thought of Eleanor's letter, which he'd read 3 times since their meeting. Her elegant handwriting had revealed a woman who'd fought her own battles against prejudice and doubt, who'd maintained the WW through decades of change, who'd lost a daughter but never lost her determination to preserve the ranching way of life. Mason paused, searching for the right words. "She's someone who sees value in what we do here, in protecting this way of life." The phone rang, its shrill tone making them all jump. Mason answered to find Martha from the post office. On the line, her voice bubbling with barely contained excitement. "Mason Brooks, you dark horse. Why didn't you tell me? Me, who's known you since you were in diapers. I had to read it in the paper like everyone else." By noon, the calls were coming so frequently that Mason took the phone off the hook. He found Sarah in the barn, brushing down her old mare with aggressive strokes. "I read her letter," Sarah said without turning around. "Found it on your desk." Mason's breath caught. "Sarah, She loved her daughter very much." Sarah's brushing slowed. "The way she wrote about losing her, I couldn't help thinking about Mom." "Yeah, this doesn't mean I'm okay with it." She finally turned to face him. "But I think I understand it a little better now." Outside, another vehicle crunched up the drive. Mason recognized Eleanor's blue Chevy pickup. Sarah saw it too, and straightened her shoulders. "Well," she said, "I suppose I should meet my future stepmother." Dawn painted the Wyoming sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold as Mason saddled his horse. The spring air held that peculiar mix of winter's lingering chill and summer's distant promise. He'd expected to ride alone this morning, their first cattle drive since the announcement wasn't scheduled until next week, but the sound of hoofbeats made him turn. Eleanor sat astride a magnificent black quarter horse, her silver hair tucked beneath a well-worn Stetson. She handled the horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the saddle. "I hope you don't mind company," she said, guiding her mount alongside his. "I always check the high pastures this time of year. There's an old trail map my husband swore by. Shows every spring and hollow worth knowing about." Mason nodded, surprised but pleased. "Lead the way." They rode in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, their horses picking their way through patches of melting snow. Eleanor carried herself like a woman half her age, moving with the horse as if they were one being. At a creek crossing, she pointed to fresh tracks in the mud. "Mountain lion," she said. "Female, from the size. She's been working this territory, and for about 3 years now. Keeps the coyote population in check, so we leave her be." Mason studied the tracks with newfound respect. "You know this land like the back of your hand." "Better." Eleanor withdrew a folded piece of leather from her saddlebag. "This helps." She handed him a hand-drawn map, the paper so old it had become nearly translucent. Detailed annotations covered its surface. Natural springs, sheltered valleys, dangerous drop-offs, all carefully marked in different hands across generations. "My husband's grandfather started this map," she explained. "Each generation has added to it. See here." She pointed to a notation about flash flood dangers in a particular canyon. "That's Robert's writing. My husband saved more than a few cattle with that knowledge." Mason traced the careful lines with his finger, feeling the weight of history in the simple document. "This is incredible. It's yours now too," Eleanor said quietly. "Part of our shared legacy." They crested a rise, and Eleanor reined in her horse. Below them stretched the vastness of their combined ranches, the Triple B's modest acreage flowing seamlessly into the Double W's expansive range. The morning sun caught the silver threads in Eleanor's hair as she surveyed the land. "Robert and I never had a son," she said, her voice carrying on the morning breeze. "Our daughter, well, after we lost her, we knew the Double W would need new blood eventually. I've watched you, Mason. Watched how you handle adversity, how you treat your people, how you love this life despite its hardships. The land chooses its own stewards." Before Mason could respond, movement in the valley below caught their attention. A group of cattle had wandered into a boggy area near the creek. Dangerous terrain this time of year. Without a word, they spurred their horses down the slope. Eleanor took the left flank, while Mason circled right, their movements synchronized as if they'd worked together for years. The cattle, responding to their practiced guidance, soon moved to safer ground. As they watched the herd settle into grazing, Eleanor smiled. "Not bad for a morning's work." "You ride better than most cowboys half your age," Mason said, meaning it. "Practice and patience." She adjusted her hat against the rising sun. "The same things that make a marriage work, I expect." They turned their horses toward home, the morning's shared work having shifted something subtle between them. This was more than a business arrangement, Mason realized. It was a partnership in the truest sense, two people bound together by their love for the land and their determination to preserve a way of life. "That mountain lion," he said as they rode. "Does she have a name?" Eleanor's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Lady Jane. I named her after my grandmother, another formidable female who ruled her territory with quiet dignity." Mason laughed, the sound carrying across the awakening range. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows long, across the land they now shared. Sarah found Eleanor in the Double W's library, surrounded by leather-bound veterinary texts that predated her own modern textbooks by decades. Late afternoon sun streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced around Eleanor's silver hair like a halo. "Those books belonged to my husband's father," Eleanor said without looking up. "He was a veterinarian too, back when most ranchers couldn't afford one. Treated half the horses in the county for nothing more than a hot meal and good conversation." Sarah hesitated in the doorway, a manila envelope clutched in her hands. "Dad said you wanted to see me." "Yes." Eleanor closed her book and gestured to the chair beside her. "I found something while organizing some old files. I thought you might like to have it." Sarah sat, her posture stiff. 3 weeks had passed since she'd first met Eleanor, and their interactions had been politely distant, but something in Eleanor's voice now caught her attention. Eleanor reached for a weathered photo album. "Your father mentioned your mother was a photographer before she got sick," Sarah said softly. "She loved taking pictures of the ranch, the animals, the people. Well, it seems she did some work for the Double W." Eleanor opened the album to reveal a series of stunning black and white photographs. "These were from our spring roundup. Must be 20 years ago now." Sarah leaned forward, her breath catching. The images were unmistakably her mother's work. The dramatic angles, the way she captured light and shadow, the intimate moments between cowboys and their horses. "I've never seen these before." She had quite an eye. Eleanor turned a page. "Look here." She caught Robert showing a young ranch hand how to properly rope a calf. "And this one," she pointed to a shot of a weather-beaten cowboy sharing his canteen with an exhausted colt. "That's pure poetry." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes as she studied the photographs. She'd been so young when her mother died, her memories more impression than detail, but these images brought her mother's artistic vision back to vivid life. "There's something else." Eleanor lifted a folder from beside her chair. "We found the original negatives, and the rights agreement your mother signed gave her ownership of all images. They belong to you now." Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the folder. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Eleanor's voice was gentle. "But I hope you'll let me help you get them properly archived. These deserve to be preserved." They spent the next hour going through the album together, Eleanor sharing stories about the people and events captured in each frame. Gradually, Sarah's tension eased as she found herself drawn into the older woman's memories. "Were you scared?" Sarah asked suddenly. "When you took over the Double W after your husband died?" Eleanor considered the question, terrified. "I was younger than your father is now, and plenty of people thought a widow had no business running a ranch this size. But fear doesn't have to stop you. It just reminds you what's worth fighting for." Sarah nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "Like Dad, with our ranch." "Your father is one of the most honorable men I've ever met," Eleanor said. "The way he's fought to preserve your family's legacy, to give you a future in this life if you want it. That's rare these days." "And this marriage?" Sarah met Eleanor's gaze directly. "Is it just about preserving legacies?" "Nothing is just anything, dear." Eleanor smiled. "Life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Your mother taught me that, actually." "She did?" I couldn't understand why she wanted to photograph old cowboys and dusty and cattle work. "Where's the beauty in that?" I asked her once. "You know what she said?" Sarah shook her head. She said, "Beauty isn't in the thing itself, it's in how it connects to everything else." Then she showed me a photo she'd taken of a sunrise through an old barn door. Said, "Sometimes you have to look through something broken to see something whole." Sarah looked down at the album in her lap, at her mother's vision of ranch life preserved in silver and shadow. "I think I understand that now. Your mother was wise that way." Eleanor stood slowly. "Now, I believe you mentioned having some questions about treating horse colic. I may not be a vet, but I've seen my share of cases. Why don't we discuss it over dinner?" Sarah rose too, tucking the precious folder of negatives under her arm. "I'd like that." The letter arrived by certified mail, its legal letterhead and formal tone masking the threat beneath the surface. Mason found Eleanor in the Double W's office, phone pressed to her ear as she discussed spring cattle prices with a buyer in Cheyenne. She gestured for him to sit, but he remained standing, the letter burning in his hand like a brand. "We'll talk numbers next week," she said into the phone, then hung up. One look at Mason's face, and her expression shifted. "What's wrong?" "Blake." "Morrison." Mason handed her the letter. "He's claiming we're in violation of state water rights. Says the merger of our ranches gives us unfair control of Clear Creek's watershed." Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she read. Blake Morrison's ranch bordered their northern boundary, and he'd been trying to expand his operation for years. "He's fishing," she said finally, "testing to see if our partnership has weak spots. There's more." Mason sank into a chair. "Joe heard talk in town. Morrison's been spreading rumors about us, saying this marriage is just a tax dodge, that we're trying to create a monopoly on grazing rights." "Of course he has." Eleanor's tone was steel wrapped in silk. "Blake Morrison's father tried the same tactics with Robert and me 30 years ago. Like father, like son." She stood, walking to a filing cabinet that looked old enough to have come west in a wagon train. From its depths, she withdrew a stack of maps and documents, yellowed with age but meticulously preserved. Robert knew Morrison Sr. would try something eventually. He spent years documenting every water right, every grazing permit, every legal claim to Clear Creek's resources. She spread the papers across her desk. "Morrison's lawsuit doesn't have a leg to stand on." Mason studied the documents, amazed at the thoroughness of the preparation. "You've been expecting this. In ranching like chess, you have to think several moves ahead." Eleanor's fingers traced a line on one of the maps. "See this survey from 1952? It clearly shows the original water rights boundaries. Morrison's claim contradicts his own family's historical agreements." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered, still in her work clothes from helping Joe with vaccinations. "The hands are talking about Morrison," she said without preamble. "They're worried." "They should be," Mason replied. "Morrison employs half the seasonal workers in the county. If he's turning people against us, then we'll show them who we really are." Eleanor's voice held the quiet authority of someone used to being heard. "Sarah, what do you know about the county fair's veterinary program?" Sarah blinked at the apparent non-sequitur. "They usually bring in vets from Cheyenne. Local ranchers can't afford the fees for routine care." "Exactly." Eleanor smiled, a strategic gleam in her eye. "What if the WWBBB offered free veterinary services during Fair Week, with a certain promising young vet student in charge?" Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "That would help a lot of small ranchers who are struggling, but Morrison will look like exactly what he is," Eleanor finished. "A man putting profit above community. Meanwhile, we'll be doing what ranchers have always done, helping our neighbors." Mason watched the interplay between his daughter and Eleanor, pride mixing with admiration. "Morrison won't take this lying down." "No, he won't." Eleanor gathered the documents, her movements precise, which is why we need to be prepared for his next move. "Sarah, I want you to work with Maria to organize the vet program. Mason, you and I need to visit every small rancher along Clear Creek. They need to hear our side of the story directly." She paused, then added softly, "Robert used to say that range wars aren't won with bullets anymore. They're won with relationships. Morrison has money and influence, But we have something better, a legacy of trust. And each other, Sarah said, surprising them both. She flushed slightly but stood her ground. I mean, isn't that the whole point? We're stronger together. Mason felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. Here were the two strongest women he knew, fighting not just for land or water rights, but for a way of life they all believed in. Eleanor must have sensed his thoughts. Blake Morrison doesn't understand what he's up against, she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience. He thinks he's fighting a business merger, but he's really fighting a family. The spring cattle count always meant long days in the saddle and nights spent under the stars. Mason sat by the campfire, his body tired, but his mind alive with the day's work. Across the flames, Eleanor wrote in her leather-bound journal, her face softened by firelight. The mountain air carried the scent of sage and pine, mixed with coffee from the battered pot warming on the coals. "Penny for your thoughts," Eleanor said without looking up from her writing. "Just thinking about how different this spring is from the last." Mason poured himself another cup of coffee. "Last year, I was counting every head, wondering if it would be enough to save the ranch. And now I'm counting them to plan for growth." He studied her across the fire. "Thank you for that." Eleanor closed her journal, tucking her pencil into its spine. "I have a confession to make," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "I used to watch you work even before all this. You had half the resources of the other ranchers, but your cattle were always the healthiest, your fences the strongest. Didn't have much choice, couldn't afford to replace what broke." "That's exactly it." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the flames. "You understand something that Blake Morrison never will. Ranching isn't about what you have, it's about how you use what you have." A coyote called in the distance, its voice echoing off the canyon walls. Eleanor pulled her jacket closer and moved to sit beside Mason on his log, sharing warmth against the night's growing chill. "I never told you about my first cattle drive," she said, her voice taking on the rhythm of a storyteller. 1969, just married to Robert. His father took one look at me, city girl in new boots, and declared I'd be back in Denver before the first snow. Mason smiled, trying to picture a young Eleanor facing down her skeptical father-in-law. "What happened?" "We hit the worst storm I'd ever seen. 2 days in, half the hands wanted to turn back, but I'd read about this valley." She pointed to a notation in her open journal, "where the ridges formed a natural windbreak. Got the whole herd there safely while other drives lost dozens of head. That would have impressed him. Oh, he still thought I was crazy. But he started listening when I talked." She chuckled softly. "By the time he passed, he'd taught me every secret." This range held. They sat in comfortable silence, watching sparks rise toward stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. Mason found himself studying Eleanor's profile, seeing past her age to the determined young woman who defied expectations to build this life. "Your turn," Eleanor said suddenly. "Tell me something nobody else knows about Mason Brooks." He considered. For a moment, "I almost gave up ranching once, right after Kate, my wife, died. Sarah was just starting high school, and I thought maybe we should move to town, give her a normal life." "What stopped you?" "Sarah, actually. Found her one morning, in the barn, helping a mare with a difficult foaling. Hadn't even known she knew how." His voice softened at the memory. "She looked up at me, covered in hay, and who knows what else, grinning like she'd just discovered gold. Said it was the first time since her mother died that she felt like she was exactly where she belonged." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The land has a way of claiming its own." "That it does." Mason hesitated, then added, "Kind of like people do." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers strong and warm. They sat like that for a long while, watching the fire burn, down to embers, while coyotes sang their ancient songs to the Wyoming night. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "We should get some sleep. Those cattle won't count themselves tomorrow. But neither of them moved immediately. Something had shifted between them, as subtle as a change in the wind, but just as significant. When Eleanor finally rose, she paused to brush a hand across Mason's shoulder, a touch that felt as natural as breathing. "Good night, Mason Brooks," she said softly. "Thank you for sharing your story." "Good night, Eleanor," he replied, watching. As she made her way to her tent, the night air felt different somehow, charged with possibility. In his bedroll later, Mason could hear Eleanor's pencil scratching in her journal again, recording the day's events, the cattle counts, and maybe, just maybe, the moment when a business arrangement began to feel like something more. The weather-beaten fence post had stood sentinel over the north pasture for decades, its wood grey and cracked with age. Eleanor ran her hand over its rough surface, feeling the splinters catch against her leather glove. "When this post starts." "Sweating," she told Mason. "A storm's coming within 24 hours. Mason squinted at the moisture beading on the ancient wood, then at the seemingly clear spring sky. "Old rancher's tale? Old rancher's wisdom." Eleanor suppressed a cough, one that had been lingering too long for comfort. "We need to move the herd from the high pasture, now." He studied her face, noting the pallor beneath her windburned cheeks. "I can handle it. You should. Don't you dare tell me to rest." Her voice carried the same steel he'd first heard in her study months ago. "I've been reading weather signs since before you were born, Mason Brooks. This post hasn't been wrong. Yet." As if to emphasize her point, a cold wind whipped across the range, carrying the first hint of snow. Eleanor swung into her saddle with practiced grace, but Mason caught the slight tremor in her hands as she gathered the reins. They rode hard for the high pasture, where nearly 300 head of cattle grazed on spring grass. Dark clouds began building over the mountains, their bellies heavy with snow. Eleanor's breathing grew labored as they climbed, though she tried to hide it. "Joe's bringing hands from the Double W," Mason said, pulling his horse alongside hers. "We don't have to do this alone." Eleanor's laugh turned into another cough. "Worried about an old woman in a storm, Mason. Worried about my partner pushing too hard." The word hung between them, carrying more weight than either had intended. Before Eleanor could respond, the first snowflakes began to fall, fat and wet against their faces. The cattle sensed the changing weather, growing restless as the wind picked up. Eleanor and Mason split up, working opposite sides of the herd to guide them toward lower ground. The snow thickened, cutting visibility to mere yards. Through the whiteness, Mason heard Eleanor's voice raised in song, an old cattle-driving tune his grandmother used to sing. The familiar melody helped keep the herd moving, their bodies bunched together against the growing cold. The storm hit, full force, when they were halfway down the mountain. Wind howled through the pines, driving snow and ice horizontally. Mason lost sight of Eleanor in the whiteout, her song swallowed by the storm's fury. "Eleanor!" His voice barely carried beyond his horse's ears. Then he heard it, a sound that turned his blood cold. Eleanor coughing, the wet, racking kind that spoke of something worse than winter's chill. Through a break in the snow, he saw her slumped in her saddle, one hand pressed to her chest. Mason spurred his horse through the herd, scattering cattle. In his rush to reach her, just as he got close, Eleanor's eyes rolled back and she began to slide from her mount. He caught her before she hit the ground, somehow managing to pull her into his saddle while keeping both horses calm. Her body felt too light against his chest, her breathing shallow and rapid. "Joe," he shouted into the storm. "Anyone!" An answering call came from below, and through the curtain of snow appeared Joe and 3 other riders. They took in the situation, at a glance, immediately moving to surround the herd. "Get her down!" Joe yelled over the wind. "We'll handle the cattle!" Mason didn't hesitate. Leaving the herd in capable hands, he turned his horse toward the Double W. Eleanor held tight against him. Her skin burned with fever despite the freezing air. "Stay with me," he murmured, feeling her stir slightly. "Just stay with me." "The cattle," she whispered, "are fine. Joe knows what he's doing." You taught him well." Her voice was faint, but carried a hint of her usual dry humor. "Though I taught you both about that fence post." Mason pressed his lips to her snow-dampened hair. "Save your breath, woman. You can lecture me about ranching wisdom when we're home." "Home," she repeated softly, the word nearly lost in another cough. "Funny how that happened." He urged his horse faster through, the storm, fear, and something deeper driving him forward. Somewhere in the past months, between shared coffee and cattle counts, between battles with Morrison and quiet nights by the fire, this remarkable woman had become more than a business partner, more than a friend. The Double W's lights appeared through the snow like a beacon, and Mason sent up a silent prayer of thanks. But Eleanor's next cough shook her entire frame, and he knew their real battle was just beginning. The medical report lay untouched on the hospital room's bedside table, its clinical language a stark contrast to the warm afternoon sun streaming through the window. Eleanor sat propped against starched pillows, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, making her look somehow both more vulnerable and more regal than Mason had ever seen her. "Pneumonia," she said, breaking the silence. "All this fuss over. A case of pneumonia." Mason moved from his vigilant post by the window to sit in the chair beside her bed. A severe case, according to Dr. Matthews, made worse by my being a stubborn old woman who ignored the symptoms too long. Eleanor's voice held its usual dry humor, but her hands twisted the blanket in her lap. "You can say it." "I was going to say, made worse by pushing yourself to save our cattle in a blizzard." He reached over and stilled her restless hands with his own. "The same thing I would have done." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "The difference is, you're not 71. No, I'm just 45 and stubborn as a mule, according to Sarah." Speaking of Sarah, Eleanor's eyes moved to the door, where their unexpected champion had appeared. Sarah entered carrying an armload of books and what looked like student medical papers. "I brought your journal from the ranch," she said, adding it to the pile, "and I've been researching advanced treatments for respiratory conditions in older adults, particularly those living at high altitudes." "Sarah!" Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "Come here." Mason watched as his daughter approached the bed, her professional demeanor cracking to reveal the worry beneath. Eleanor patted the edge of the mattress, and Sarah perched there, looking young and uncertain. "Now," Eleanor said, "both of you listen carefully. Yes, I'm sick. Yes, I should have said something sooner. And yes, I'm going to follow the doctor's orders, mostly." Her eyes sparkled with a hint of her usual spirit. "But I am not made of glass, and I won't be treated like I am." "The doctor said," Sarah began. "The doctor said rest and antibiotics, not wrapping me in cotton wool." Eleanor's voice softened. "I appreciate your concern, both of you, but this isn't my first battle, and it won't be my last." Mason felt her fingers tighten around his. "You scared us," he said simply. "I scared myself," she admitted, the confession costing her visible effort. "When I couldn't catch my breath up there, for the first time in my life I felt old." "You're not old," Sarah said fiercely. "You're just experienced," Eleanor suggested, drawing a reluctant laugh from both of them. A knock at the door announced Dr. Matthews, a woman about Mason's age who'd known Eleanor for decades. She reviewed the latest test results with practiced efficiency, but Mason noticed how she directed her comments to Eleanor rather than to him or Sarah. "The antibiotics are working," she concluded, "but you need to take it easy for at least 2 weeks. Real rest, Eleanor, not ranch-style rest." Eleanor nodded with surprising meekness, but Mason caught the calculating look in her eye. As the doctor left, he called her on it. "You're already planning how to work from your bedroom, aren't you?" "Of course I am." She squeezed his hand. "But I promise to be sensible about it. I've spent 50 years building this life. I'm not going to risk it over pride." Sarah stood, gathering her papers. "I need to call Joe. Let him know how you're doing. The hands have been worried." When they were alone, Eleanor turned to Mason, her face serious. "There's something we need to discuss. If you're about to suggest some kind of contingency plan—" "Of course I am. I'm a rancher. We planned for everything. She reached for her journal, her movement still weaker than he liked. But that's not what I mean. When I was up there in the storm, before everything went fuzzy, I realized something. Mason waited, his heart doing an odd sideways step in his chest. I realized I wasn't afraid of dying, she said softly. I was afraid of leaving you before. She paused, choosing her words carefully, before we had a chance to see what this could really be. The afternoon sun painted golden stripes across the hospital bed as Mason lifted their joined hands to his lips. We have time, he promised. But when you're stronger, we're going to have a long talk about the difference between courage and foolishness. Eleanor's laugh turned into a small cough, but her eyes danced. Says the man who rode through a blizzard with an unconscious woman and 300 cattle to worry about. That wasn't courage, he said, his voice rough with emotion. That was just knowing where I needed to be. A week after returning home from the hospital, Eleanor sat in her favorite chair on the Double W's front porch, watching the sunset paint the spring sky in shades of amber and rose. Beside her, on a small table, lay the ranch's original branding, iron, its Double W design worn smooth by generations of use. Mason brought her a cup of tea, then settled into the adjacent rocker. After a week of enforced rest, color had returned to Eleanor's cheeks, though she still tired more easily than she liked to admit. Sarah called, he said. She's coming home this weekend. Says she has news. Eleanor smiled. She's been offered a position with the veterinary clinic in town. Called me yesterday to discuss the logistics of splitting her time between their practice and the ranches. Mason raised an eyebrow. She told you before she told me? She wanted my opinion on whether the Double W could support a full-time veterinary facility. Eleanor lifted the old branding iron, its weight familiar in her hands. Which brings me to something I've been wanting to discuss with you. She handed him the iron, watching as he traced the pattern with calloused fingers. Robert's grandfather designed this brand, she said. Said the two W's stood for work and wisdom, claimed you couldn't run a ranch without both. Smart man! He was. But times change. These days it takes more than work and wisdom to keep ranching alive. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I've been thinking about the future, ours and the ranches. Mason set the brand aside, giving her his full attention. The setting sun caught the silver in her hair, reminding him how close he'd come to losing her. The Double W has the resources, and the Triple B has the innovation, Eleanor continued. You've done remarkable things with limited means, Mason. Imagine what we could accomplish by combining our strengths. She reached for a leather portfolio, beside her chair, withdrawing several carefully prepared documents. I want to establish a foundation, the Double W Triple B Ranch Foundation for Sustainable Ranching, teaching the next generation how to adapt traditional methods to modern challenges. Mason studied the papers, noting the detailed plans for education programs, research partnerships, and community outreach. This is more than just running cattle. It's about preserving a way of life, Eleanor said passionately. Sarah's veterinary work would be just the beginning. We could offer internships, host workshops, become a model for how historic ranches can thrive in the 21st century. Blake Morrison won't like it. He's already spreading rumors about us trying to dominate local ranching. Blake Morrison is fighting yesterday's battles. This isn't about domination, it's about adaptation. Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes bright with purpose. What if we offered his son Tommy that internship he's been asking about? The boy has good instincts, whatever his father thinks. Mason chuckled. Using wisdom instead of work to solve that. Problem? Using both. Eleanor smiled. The foundation would be our legacy, Mason. Not just to Sarah, but to every young person who wants to keep ranching alive. The Double W and Triple B working together to build something lasting. The sun had slipped behind the mountains, leaving the porch in twilight. Eleanor shivered slightly, and Mason draped a blanket around her shoulders, letting his hands linger. When did you start planning all this? He asked. In the hospital. She caught his concerned look and added, Not because I'm worried about time running out, because I finally had time to think about what matters most. She reached for his hand. I've spent my life preserving Robert's legacy. Now I want to build one with you. Mason felt the weight of the moment, of everything shifting into a new alignment. I thought this marriage was about saving the triple. B, he said softly. It was. It is. Eleanor's fingers tightened around his. But somewhere between that business arrangement and this porch, it became about saving each other too. From inside the house, they heard Maria calling about dinner. But neither moved immediately, content to sit in the growing darkness, holding hands and watching the first stars appear over their shared land. Eleanor, Mason said finally, about that legacy. She turned to him, her face soft in the twilight. I think we've already started building it. The old branding iron caught the last light of day, its weathered surface holding the hopes of the past and the promises of the future in its enduring design. The spring dance tickets lay on Eleanor's dressing table, their simple design unchanged since she'd first attended the event half a century ago. She adjusted her turquoise necklace, a gift from Robert on their 10th anniversary, and wondered what he would think of her going to the dance with Mason. You look beautiful, Sarah said from the doorway. She'd come home early to help Eleanor prepare, though Eleanor suspected it had more to do with moral support than any need for assistance. I look like what I am, a 71-year-old woman trying not to make a fool of herself. But Eleanor smiled at her reflection, pleased with the way the silver-grey dress complemented her hair. You look like someone who's about to enjoy her first real date with her husband. Sarah crossed the room and squeezed Eleanor's shoulders. And if anyone gossips, well, they'll have to deal with me. Eleanor patted Sarah's hand. When did you become such a fierce defender of this marriage? Around the same time I realized it wasn't just a marriage anymore. Downstairs they heard the front door open and Mason's voice greeting Maria. Eleanor's heart did a small flutter that had nothing to do with her recent illness. She found him in the foyer, wearing a pressed black shirt and his good boots. He'd gotten a haircut. She noticed, and the silver at his temples caught the light. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly, and something shifted in his expression that made her feel decades younger. Eleanor, he said softly, then cleared his throat. You look... that dress. Clean up pretty good for an old lady, don't? She teased, rescuing him from his stammering. Mason shook his head. You look exactly like who you are, the most remarkable woman I know. Sarah made a sound suspiciously like a stifled laugh. And that's my cue to leave. Don't do anything. I wouldn't do. That leaves us plenty of options, Eleanor called after her retreating daughter-in-law, drawing a startled laugh from Mason. The community center was already full when they arrived, the local band playing a mix of country classics and slower numbers. Heads turned as they entered, but Eleanor noted the difference from their first public appearance together. The whispers seemed more appreciative than scandalized. Joe and Lisa waved them over to their table, little Tommy asleep in Lisa's arms despite the music. Mrs. Whitman, you look amazing, Lisa said warmly. Doesn't she look amazing, Mason? Mason's hand found the small of Eleanor's back. She always does. The simple touch and sincere words sent warmth spreading through Eleanor's chest. When the band started playing Crazy, she felt Mason lean closer. Would you dance with me? She hesitated. Mason, my dancing days are happening right now. He stood and offered his hand with an exaggerated bow that made her laugh. On the dance floor, Eleanor discovered that some things the body never forgets. Mason led with the easy confidence of a man used to moving with animals and machinery, adapting his steps to match her pace. She caught glimpses of their reflection in the community center's windows. Silver hair against dark, her hand small, but sure in his larger one. People are staring, she murmured. Let them. Mason drew her slightly closer. Though if you're worried about propriety, I should mention I have dishonorable intentions. Eleanor missed a step, caught off guard by the playful warmth in his voice. Mr. Brooks, are you flirting with me? Mrs. Brooks, he countered softly. I believe I am. The name, spoken for the first time without any hint of business arrangement, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with age or illness. As the evening wound down, they stepped outside for air. The spring night was cool, but not cold. Stars scattered like diamond dust across the Wyoming sky. From inside, the band played Waltz Across Texas. I remember the first time I heard that song, Eleanor said. Robert and I had just started dating. He was so nervous about asking me to dance that he stepped on my feet 3 times. Mason chuckled. And now I'm standing under the same stars with a different man, feeling those same butterflies. She turned to face him. Life has a funny way of giving you second chances, doesn't it? Instead of answering, Mason leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, almost tentative, but carried the weight of everything that had grown between them over the past months. When they parted, Eleanor saw their reflection in the community center windows. Not a business arrangement, not a marriage of convenience, but a man and woman who had found love in life's second act. Take me home, Mason, she said softly. I think it's time we started writing our own story. The shared canteen passed between them, its dented surface warm from the spring sun. Mason and Eleanor sat astride their horses on a ridge overlooking the valley, watching their combined herds move like a living river across the grassland below. The spring roundup was in full swing, and from their vantage point they could see dozens of riders working in coordinated patterns to guide the cattle. Sarah's got a good eye for strays, Eleanor commented, nodding toward where their daughter was cutting out a wandering calf. Must get that from her father. Mason smiled, remembering their first roundup together. As I recall, you're the one who spotted that black baldy heifer hidden in the willows last year. Well, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling, maybe she gets it from both sides of the family now. Below them, Joe's voice carried on the wind as he called instructions to the newer hands. The WWBBB Spring Roundup had drawn cowboys from across 3 counties, all eager to work for what had become the most talked-about ranch operation in Wyoming. Blake Morrison's boy is doing well, Eleanor observed, watching Tommy Morrison expertly turn a group of cattle. Better than his father ever was with stock. Having second thoughts about hiring him? Not at all. Eleanor handed the canteen back to Mason, their fingers brushing. That boy was born to ranch. His father's just too stubborn to see it. They rode down to join the work, falling into an easy rhythm born of months working side by side. No words were needed now. A gesture, a nod, a subtle shift in position was enough to communicate their intentions. The other hands watched with quiet admiration as the owners moved through the herd like dance partners, each anticipating the other's moves. Remember when you thought this was just a business arrangement? Joe called out as they pushed a group of cattle toward the branding area. Watch it, young man, Eleanor shot back, but her smile was warm. I'm still your boss. Yes, ma'am. Both of you are. The words carried no resentment, only respect. The hands had seen how the merger of the ranches had brought new life to both operations. The WW's resources combined with Mason's innovative management had created something greater than either ranch had been alone. Sarah rode up alongside them, her face flushed with exertion and satisfaction. We've got the new vaccine protocols working perfectly, not a single calf lost this season. Your mother would be proud, Eleanor said softly, and Mason felt his heart swell at how naturally she included Kate in their family story. The day wore on, sun climbing high, then beginning its westward slide. They stopped for a brief lunch, sharing food and water from saddlebags while swapping stories and observations. Eleanor pulled out her ever-present notebook, updating cattle counts and marking which bloodlines were showing the best results. "Tommy!" she called, waving the young Morrison over. "Come look at these breeding records. Your grandfather started some of these lines 40 years ago." The boy's eyes lit up as Eleanor walked him through decades of careful genetic selection. Mason watched them, seeing how she wove history and future together, teaching the next generation while honoring the past. "You're staring," Sarah murmured, settling beside him. "Just thinking how lucky we all are," he replied. The afternoon brought the most challenging part of the roundup, moving the combined herds through a narrow canyon to the summer pastures. It was the kind of task that showed the true measure of a ranch's leadership. Eleanor and Mason took point positions, naturally, their horses moving in perfect synchronization. As they approached the canyon, Eleanor pulled up slightly. "Remember that first cattle drive together?" she asked. "When you thought I was crazy for singing to the herd?" Mason laughed. "I learned my lesson. Ladies first?" Eleanor's voice rose, clear and strong, carrying the old cattle-driving song across the valley. One by one, other voices joined in, Sarah, Joe, even young Tommy Morrison. The cattle moved steady and calm through the canyon, guided by the familiar melody and the sure hands of their drivers. At the other end, Mason and Eleanor reined in their horses, watching as the last of the cattle emerged safely into the wide meadow beyond. The setting sun turned the dust kicked up by thousands of hooves into a golden haze. "Not bad for a couple of old hands," Eleanor said, reaching for the canteen. Mason caught her hand before she could take it, bringing her fingers to his lips. "Instead, I love you," he said simply, the words feeling as natural as breathing. Eleanor's eyes softened. "I know," she replied. "I've known since that day in the blizzard." She squeezed his hand. "I love you too." Below them, their family and crew worked to settle the herd for the night, their movements sure and practiced. The combined brands of the Double W and Triple B flashed on cattle flanks in the fading light, no longer separate marks, but symbols of a legacy growing stronger by the day. Mason found the letter, while helping Eleanor organize old files in the study. It had slipped between two ledgers, the envelope unmarked, except for his name in Eleanor's elegant handwriting. The paper was crisp, recent, not part of the historical records they'd been sorting. "What's this?" he asked, holding up the envelope. Eleanor looked up from her desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose. When she saw what he was holding, a faint blush colored her cheeks. "Ah, I wrote that the night after the spring dance. Wasn't sure I'd ever give it to you. Do you want me to read it now?" She removed her glasses, folding them carefully. "Why not? Though you might want to sit down first." Mason settled into the leather armchair by the window, the same one he'd sat in during their first meeting months ago. The afternoon sun warmed his shoulders as he opened the letter. "My dearest Mason, I've started this letter a dozen times, searching for the right words to explain how a business arrangement turned into the greatest surprise of my life. Perhaps I should begin with a confession. I've been keeping a secret. That day you came to discuss our marriage contract, I already knew exactly what kind of man you were. For years, I'd watched you fight to keep your ranch alive, to raise Sarah, alone, to maintain your integrity when others would have taken easier paths. I didn't just choose you to save the Triple B. I chose you because you reminded me of what ranching is supposed to be about. Not just surviving, but living with purpose and passion. When Robert died, everyone expected me to sell the Double W. A widow my age had no business running a ranch, they said. But Robert had taught me something crucial. A ranch isn't just land and cattle. It's a living thing shaped by the dreams and determination of those who love it. I see that same truth in you, Mason. You understand that we're not just preserving buildings and bloodlines. We're protecting a way of life that's worth fighting for. But here's what I never expected. Somewhere between our business discussions and shared work, between crisis and celebration, I found myself falling in love. Not with the idea of you or the convenience of our arrangement, but with the man who brings me coffee exactly the way I like it, the partner who knows when to lead and when to follow, the gentleman who asked me to dance and made me feel young. Again, I know the age difference concerns you sometimes. I'd be lying if I said it never crosses my mind, but I've lived long enough to know that love doesn't follow conventional patterns. It arrives when it chooses, in the packages it prefers. Sarah asked me recently if I ever regret our arrangement. I told her my only regret was not having the courage to write this letter sooner. Because the truth is, Mason Brooks, you've given me more than a partner in business. You've given me a reason to look forward instead of back. I love you. Not as a business partner, not as a friend, but as a woman loves a man who has captured her heart completely. Perhaps it's foolish for someone my age to feel this way. If so, then call me a fool. I've earned the right to be foolish about love at least once more in my life. With all my heart, Eleanor Mason looked up from the letter to find Eleanor watching him, her expression a mix of vulnerability and quiet strength. "When were you going?" "To give me this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I wasn't sure I would." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over their combined ranches. It seemed presumptuous, perhaps even ridiculous, for a woman my age to write a love letter. Mason crossed to her, turning her gently to face him. "Eleanor Whitman Brooks, there is nothing ridiculous about you." "No?" A smile played at the corners of her mouth. "Not even when I'm being foolish about love? Especially not then." He drew her close, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender that always clung to her hair. "Though I do have one complaint about your letter." She pulled back slightly, eyebrows raised in question. "You beat me to it. I've been trying to find the right words to tell you the same things." Eleanor's laugh was soft and warm. "Well, Mr. Brooks, you could try telling me now." Instead of speaking, Mason kissed her with all the tenderness and passion that had grown between them. When they parted, Eleanor's eyes were bright with tears and joy. "I suppose that's one way to say it," she whispered. Eleanor's old wedding ring caught the light as she removed it from its velvet box, the gold band worn smooth by decades of wear. "Robert gave me this the day we married," she told Mason, holding it out. "I think it's time for a change." They stood in the quiet of their bedroom, morning sun streaming through the windows. On the dresser lay an invitation to the annual Cattlemen's Association dinner, traditionally the biggest social event of the ranching calendar. "Are you sure?" Mason asked, taking the ring gently. "I've never been more sure of anything." Eleanor's eyes held his. "The past is precious, but it's still the past. We're building something new." He closed his hand around the ring, feeling its warmth. "I have something for you too." From his pocket, he withdrew a simple silver band set with a single turquoise stone. "Belonged to my grandmother. Sarah helped me find it in the old homestead last week." Eleanor's breath caught. "Mason, I thought we could make an announcement at the dinner. No more speculation about business arrangements or convenience." He took her hand. "If you're willing." Her smile was answer enough. The Cattlemen's Association. Dinner was held in the grand ballroom of Clearwater's historic hotel. As Eleanor and Mason entered, conversations paused, then resumed with renewed energy, but the whispers now held more warmth than scandal. Sarah was already there, deep in discussion with the State Veterinary Board about the WWBB's new medical facility. Joe and Lisa sat with Tommy Morrison, who was eagerly showing them his acceptance letter to the ranch's internship program. Blake Morrison stood by the bar, his face darkening as he watched his son. But before he could move toward the group, his wife caught his arm, whispering something that made him pause. "Quite a crowd," Eleanor murmured, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Good thing I don't mind an audience." Mason squeezed her hand. The association president called for attention, beginning the usual speeches about rainfall, totals, and beef prices. Mason listened with half an ear, his focus on the woman beside him. Eleanor sat with her usual grace, but he could feel the slight tremor in her fingers where they rested against his. When the president asked if anyone had announcements to share, Mason stood. The room quieted, faces turning toward him with open curiosity. "Most of you know that Eleanor Whitman and I married 6 months ago," he began. There's been plenty of talk about business arrangements and practical considerations. He paused, surveying the room. Well, I'm here to set the record straight. Eleanor looked up at him, love and trust shining in her eyes. I married Eleanor because she's the most remarkable woman I've ever known. She's tough as Wyoming winter and warm as spring sunshine. She's taught me more about ranching and about life than I learned in 45 years on my own. His voice grew softer, more intimate, and somewhere between moving cattle and fighting blizzards, between shared coffee and shared dreams, I fell completely in love with her. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing his grandmother's ring. Eleanor Brooks, would you marry me again? Not for business, not for convenience, but because I want to spend whatever years we have left building this life together? The room held its breath as Eleanor stood. Why, Mr. Brooks, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silence, I thought you'd never ask. As Mason slipped the turquoise ring onto her finger, replacing Robert's old band, a spontaneous cheer erupted. Sarah was the first to reach them, wrapping them both in a tearful embrace. Joe whistled sharply, and someone started clapping. Through the crowd, Mason caught sight of Blake Morrison. The man stood silent for a moment, then slowly raised his glass in acknowledgement. His wife beamed beside him, and Tommy's grin threatened to split his face. Speech, someone called, and others took up the cry. Eleanor stepped forward, her silver hair gleaming in the ballroom lights. Love isn't just for the young, she said simply. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come when you least expect them, wrapped in packages you never thought to look for. She turned to Mason. Sometimes they come wearing dusty boots and carrying the heart of a true rancher. As the celebration continued around them, Mason drew Eleanor into a dance. Happy? He asked softly. Deliriously. She rested her head against his shoulder. Though you did steal my thunder, I was planning to propose next week. Mason laughed, the sound carrying across the ballroom. Of course you were. The turquoise ring caught the light as they danced, its silver surface unmarked, ready to collect the memories they would make together. The combined ranch deed lay on the lawyer's polished desk, its fresh ink glistening in the morning light. Charlie Peterson, who'd handled both families' legal affairs for 30 years, sat back with a satisfied smile. Well, that's it, he said. The WWBBB Ranch is now officially one entity. Though I must say the paperwork for joining the properties was a lot simpler than that marriage contract you two started with. Eleanor and Mason exchanged amused glances. Sarah, who'd insisted on being present for the signing, leaned forward to study the document. Look at this, she said, pointing to a clause near the bottom. The educational trust is already incorporated into the deed. Your idea, Eleanor reminded her, a teaching ranch for the next generation. They stepped out into the bright Wyoming morning, the deed safely tucked into Mason's briefcase. Main Street was busy with Saturday traffic, and several people called out greetings as they passed. The town's attitude had shifted remarkably since their renewed vows at the cattleman's dinner. First day of the rest of our lives, Mason said, helping Eleanor into their truck. Oh, I'd say that day was about 6 months ago, Eleanor replied, with a twinkle in her eye, when a certain cowboy finally admitted he was in love with an old cattle baroness. Mom! Sarah protested from the back seat, but she was grinning. They drove out to the ranch, their ranch, singular now, where Joe had organized a celebration. The barn had been cleared for dancing, tables groaned with potluck dishes, and pickup trucks filled the yard. Even Blake Morrison had shown up with his family, his son Tommy, proudly wearing his WWBBB intern badge. Mrs. Brooks, Tommy called out as they parked. Mr. Brooks, wait till you see what we did with the sign. At the main gate, the old ranch signs had been replaced with a single new one. The WW and BBB brands were intertwined in an artistic design, with WWBBB Ranch arched above and Est 1889, United 2025 below. Sarah's design, Joe explained proudly. Lisa painted it. Eleanor squeezed Mason's hand. As they admired the sign, Both are histories, preserved but moving forward together. Inside the barn, the celebration was in full swing. Maria had outdone herself with the decorations, stringing lights from the rafters and setting up photos chronicling both ranches' histories. The newest addition was a large print of Eleanor and Mason at their vow renewal, their faces glowing with happiness as they exchanged rings. "May I have everyone's attention?" Sarah's voice carried over the crowd. She stood on a hay bale, holding up a glass. "Today we're celebrating more than just the joining of two ranches. We're celebrating family in all its forms. We're celebrating love that knows no boundaries of age or convention, and we're celebrating the future of ranching in Wyoming." She gestured to where several young interns stood with Tommy. "Thanks to Mom and Dad, and yes, Eleanor, you're definitely my mom now. This ranch will help train the next generation of ranchers. The veterinary clinic opens next month. The sustainable grazing program starts in the fall, and we've already had inquiries from 3 universities about research partnerships." Mason wrapped his arm around Eleanor's waist as their daughter continued. "But most of all, we're celebrating 2 people who had the courage to take a business arrangement and turn it into something beautiful, who showed us that love can bloom in the most unexpected places and that it's never too late for a new beginning." The crowd raised their glasses. Eleanor turned to Mason, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "She's right, you know, about the new beginnings." "Speaking of which," Mason said, "I had a call from the adoption agency yesterday. That boy you've been mentoring, Jimmy, his foster parents are moving away and he needs a permanent home." Eleanor's breath caught. "Mason, are you saying—" "I'm saying we've got plenty of room, plenty of love to share, and a ranch that could use another pair of young hands in training. If you're interested." "If I'm interested in giving a child a home and a future," Eleanor's voice wavered. "Oh, Mason Brooks, just when I think I couldn't love you more." He kissed her then, not caring that half the county was watching. When they parted, Sarah was beside them, having caught the end of their conversation. "Really?" she asked, eyes shining. "I'm going to be a big sister." "If Jimmy agrees," Eleanor said, "though something tells me a boy who spends every free moment with the horses won't take much convincing." The celebration continued as the sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in spectacular colors. Mason and Eleanor stood in the barn doorway, watching their extended family, blood relation and chosen family alike, share food, stories, and laughter. "You know what Robert used to say about sunsets?" Eleanor mused. "He said they're not an ending at all, just the beginning of a new kind of light." Mason looked at his wife, this remarkable woman who had given him not just a second chance at love, but a whole new vision of what life could be. "Well then," he said softly, "here's to new light." The sunrise photograph sat in a simple silver frame on Eleanor's bedside table. Mason had taken it just that morning, capturing the exact moment dawn broke over their united ranch. The image showed Eleanor on horseback, silhouetted against the rising sun, her silver hair catching the first light of day. "1 week," Mason said, pulling on his boots as Eleanor studied the picture. "Hard to believe it's only been 7 days since we made it official." "Seems like longer," Eleanor replied, "in the best possible way." They rode out together as the sky began to lighten, following the same trail they'd taken on their first morning ride together, but where that ride had been full of careful conversation and maintained distances, this one held the comfortable silence of 2 people completely at ease with each other. The world was quiet except for birdsong and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. As they crested the rise overlooking their combined property, Eleanor reined in her horse. "I used to ride up here with Robert," she said softly. "He loved this view, said you could see all of life's possibilities from this spot." She turned to Mason, her eyes bright in the growing light. He was right, though not in the way he meant. Mason guided his horse closer to hers. "How so?" "Because standing here now, I can see possibilities I never imagined a year ago." Jimmy moving into the East Wing next month. Sarah's veterinary clinic already booked through summer. Tommy Morrison teaching our summer interns about sustainable grazing methods. She smiled. And you, of course. The greatest possibility of all. The sun broke over the horizon then, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Below them, their ranch came to life, lights appearing in the bunkhouse as hands prepared for the day's work, smoke rising from the main house chimney where Maria would be starting breakfast. "Remember what you asked me that first morning?" Eleanor said, "about old ranchers' tales versus wisdom?" Mason laughed. "As I recall, you proved your point pretty thoroughly during that blizzard." "Well, I have another piece of wisdom to share." She reached across the space between them, taking his hand. "Love is like the sunrise. No matter how long the night, it always finds a way to begin again." "Speaking of beginnings," Mason said, "I found something interesting in the Triple B records. Yesterday, turns out my great-grandfather and Robert's grandfather were planning to merge the ranches back in 1920. They even drew up preliminary papers. What happened? The Depression hit. Plans got shelved. But look at this." He pulled a yellow document from his saddlebag. Their original vision wasn't just about combining land. They wanted to create a place where ranching knowledge could be passed down, where tradition could meet innovation. Eleanor studied the old papers, her expression thoughtful. "So, we're not just building something new, we're fulfilling a dream that started generations ago," Mason finished, "and making it better than they could have imagined." The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist. In the distance, they could see Sarah's truck heading toward the clinic and Joe's figure moving among the cattle. "Quite a family we've built," Eleanor said softly, "and growing." Mason smiled. "Jimmy's social worker called last night. The paperwork's been expedited. He could be here as soon as next week." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears of joy. "That boy has so much love to give. Did I tell you I found him in the barn yesterday, reading horse training manuals to that blind? He colt?" "Like mother, like son," Mason said, his voice rough with emotion. They sat in companionable silence, watching their world wake up. Finally, Eleanor gathered her reins. "Ready to start another day, Mr. Brooks? With you?" "Always, Mrs. Brooks." They rode down toward home, their horses moving in perfect step. Behind them, the sunrise photo captured the moment of dawn, but ahead lay all the moments they would capture together, small joys and big celebrations, quiet mornings and busy days, the steady rhythm of a life built on love that had come late, but true. At the barn, Sarah met them with coffee and news about a mare about to foal. In the kitchen, Maria could be seen preparing Jimmy's favorite breakfast, anticipating his arrival. And somewhere on their vast range, the future was taking shape, one sunrise at a time. "You know what?" Mason said as they dismounted. "I think this is going to be our best chapter yet." Eleanor's smile held all the warmth of the rising sun. "My darling," she said, "it already is.